And we're back. Good afternoon again. My name is David Frise, and this is a session on the National Digital Twin Programme, a digital vision for the built environment. And we have Mark Enzer with us today. Welcome, Mark.
Hi, thanks very much.
You've got quite a CV, Mark. We had a session with Paul Morell earlier, who, having looked at your CV, so an initial degree from the University of Oxford, then one from the University of Leeds, and an MBA from the University of Cambridge. He described you as being far too clever for the industry, which I thought was a real compliment. Anyway, we very much look forward to your presentation. You're going to do your slides, and then we'll come back and talk about digital twins and the Centre for Digital Built Britain.
Right, thank you very much. So I'd like to introduce this in relation to a vision for the built environment, if I may, and put this as context for what I think is a very necessary digital transformation. But I think it needs to sit within the context of us knowing where we're going and what do we want from our built environment. So if I may introduce this vision, then we'll see the context. So the first thing to say is if we're talking about our vision for the built environment, who's we? Who are we? Who's the our? And with this vision, we're really talking about a very broad swathe of organisations that represent a lot of other organisations all across the built environment. And you'll see Pride of Place, BESA is most absolutely there. But so are many others, not just representing those who develop the built environment, but also those who some way of it and get something out of it for those of us who live in it, which is all of us. So when we're talking about our vision for the built environment, it's all of us. And then if we get to what that vision is, and I think it can be expressed really simply in terms of a purpose, and this kind of recognition that we need to see the built environment with a purpose. And that purpose has to be about enabling people and nature to flourish together for generations. So really important, I think, that it's recognizing both people and nature. And here we are in COP26 week. And so I guess a lot of people are making this point. But maybe we haven't had such a strong voice in the built environment about this, recognizing how the built environment and nature actually have to work together. And I'll come back to that in just a moment as to why that might be and why now. But also this notion of flourishing, that we don't want to just exist. That the whole idea here really is that we can flourish together. And it needs to be for the long haul, for generations. So not just for ourselves, but for us going forwards, for children and grandchildren and onwards. And I think as part of this vision, we can explain it in three key chunks, which I'd like to introduce to you. One is about outcomes and really recognizing that we kind of have to shift our focus, that the built environment isn't just about building things, it's about the stuff that we've built. And we need to see that it's those systems, the complex system of systems that we have built around us, that we live within, and sometimes we don't see it because we live so close to it, that it's that delivers the outcomes we need. So certainly seeing this vision in relation to outcomes, but also seeing it in relation to these interconnected systems that are essential for our well-being, and not just the built systems, but the natural systems. And then also seeing it in terms of the services, because really the outcomes that we're talking about for people and nature depends on the services that we get from the systems. So what I'd like to do is kind of build these up into a coherent vision that shows how we all fit in, really, and how our industry serves this built environment that serves people and society and nature. And why now? Why does this matter right now? Well, I guess one starting point is just because it is now so big. You probably remember a couple of months back, it was all over the newspapers, that the total mass of the built environment now exceeds the mass of all living things. And I don't know how they work that out, and it's probably not exactly correct, but it's going to be near enough. And what it means, though, is that our built environment really matters. We've been building it for centuries, and now it's big enough that it's encroaching on the natural environment. It matters. It has a massive impact. So that's one of the things. There's been a bidding point there. Another thing I think is that the massive challenges that we face in this generation are largely systemic. They affect all the systems. Now, what I mean by that, and if we look at climate change as a prime example, climate change affects everything. It doesn't just flood one silo, it floods everything. So we can't address climate change in silos. It's a systemic challenge. It affects the whole system. So we have to address it with the whole system. And that's the same with net zero, climate resilience, achieving circular economy. These massive challenges of our generation need us to take a systems view. And then I guess also the pandemic, we want to get that behind us, don't we? But we still need to learn from it. And I think one of the things that we can see, and we learned it early on, I think, in the pandemic, is how crucial well-being is. And we're kind of recognizing that our well-being is actually fragile, and it's also deeply tied to nature as well as the environment within which we live. So there's something about well-being being tied up with these things. We definitely saw that decisions have long-term consequences. Decisions matter. And so the decisions we make in the built environment, which last for yonks, those really matter. Also, we saw how change can happen quickly. If we want change to happen, it can happen. And we also very much need to get more from less. That's kind of always been true, hasn't it? But I think it becomes even more true when there's not a lot of money in the coffers. And so we need to get more from our built environment. Another thing about the why now, I guess, is this thing about the choices. And it's amazing to see how we still live within a built environment that was shaped by many, many generations before us. The whole thing of what did the Romans do for us? Well, loads, but we're still benefiting from that. And we can kind of see that some of the corridors that we still use have been established for thousands of years. And as we establish new corridors, like HS2, that infrastructure corridor will be around for yonks, possibly beyond the life of trains. But also, we see that civil structures last maybe for centuries. We see that mechanical equipment lasts maybe for decades. And then we get to the kind of the digital stuff, which we can see turns over much quicker. But the choices we make in each one of these kind of time scales really matters. And the choices we make today will affect generations. Therefore, we need to be very attentive to those choices. So let's dig into those three chunks that I talked about, and starting with outcomes. And I think that one of the key things which we should be recognizing from our built environment is this whole thing about purpose, and recognizing that at its heart, it's the use of the built environment that matters. Now, we don't often talk about that because in the construction industry in particular, we kind of focus on the delivery of new assets, but we've been delivering assets for ages. And so now we have this kind of complex system. And the more important thing really is the use of it. That's how we get our benefit. And then in order to make the assets available for use, there's all sorts of processes which go on and have to go on and on for as long as we want them to work, like operation and maintenance. And then every now and again, we do some interventions on that. And so that's where we kick off our planning and design and building. But I think really important to see that at the heart of it, it's really all about use. And if we buy into this idea that what's most important out of our built environment are the outcomes, then it makes sense to have some kind of alignment in those outcomes, kind of from top to bottom, from global outcomes like the Sustainable Development Goals, all the way through to local outcomes, and doing that on purpose, so that we have this kind of alignment, and so that as we identify the outcomes which we really want for ourselves, for our grandchildren, for nature, etc., then they kind of line up. And so I think really important when we think about outcomes, to think about both purpose and alignment. And then when it comes to the systems, I just want to develop this idea a little bit further, because I've already kind of introduced it. But it's saying that we've been building our built environment for ages, and we've been connecting it up. But I think sometimes we don't see what we've built because it's all around us. It's almost like it's hiding in plain sight. This amazing thing that we live within and we depend on has become a system of systems. So within the built environment, we've got all sorts of complex interconnected systems, our transport, our energy, our water, our telecoms. All of those are themselves complex and interconnected, but they're connected to each other. And then also we have the complex interconnection with the natural environment, which is kind of in amongst what we've built, but also around it. And then also what's been emerging over the last few decades is cyber physical systems. And it's been in the news very recently, hasn't it? The whole idea of the metaverse, this idea of there being digital worlds. And you can kind of imagine the sum of all those digital worlds being the metaverse. But what is clear is that those digital worlds are real. They have real value, and they are also complex and interconnected systems. So when you add all of those together, you end up with this thing that we live within, that is essential to our well-being. And in order for us not just to survive, but to thrive, these systems have to work, and they have to work together. We can't have kind of one dominating and squeezing out the other. And so I think this systems view ends up being of enormous importance, particularly if what we want to do is deliver the outcomes we desire. And so in some ways, this diagram brings it together, brings the division together, because I've tried to point out that the outcomes are the most important thing. That's what it's all about. Better outcomes for people and society and for nature. And have shown that what we have to work with are these complex systems, systems which really matter to us, the built systems and the natural systems. But actually, they kind of come together in a way, providing the services that help deliver the outcomes. And it's really those services that make the connection between one and the other. And if we want the better outcomes, which we all do, I'm sure we all do, what that means really is that we have to understand those systems better and intervene more effectively. We need to have that systems view, because if we don't, all we'll do is kind of tinker around the edges, and we won't be able to have a hope of addressing those big systemic challenges that I talked about, achieving net zero, climate resilience, circular economy. And this matters. And I guess, this week of all weeks, we're being reminded almost every moment of the day on the news that this matters. But I think it's really important for us in the built environment to see how much of an effect we have and what a positive thing we can do to deliver those outcomes. But we kind of need to see the big picture, because if all we see are the projects we do, then we don't see this bigger picture. We need to see those projects as interventions on the system that can then deliver us all the outcomes that we want and that our children and our children's children deserve. So that's the overall picture that I wanted to put across. But in addition to that, I just want to touch on some key enablers, because it might be that we say, yes, we want all of that. It kind of makes obvious sense. It might sound a bit theoretical, but of course we want that. The next question comes as, so how do we get that? What have we got to hand that can help us achieve those good things that we want? And I think that something becomes really clear in this is that it needs collaboration. We can make this vision a reality. We can deliver better outcomes for people and society and for nature, but only if we play our part. And that needs coordination. We can't do that in silos. And we can make use of some fantastic enablers that just happen to come across at the same time as a lot of the big challenges. And that's where the digital stuff comes in. So I'll get to that very quickly. And I think one of the key things which we need to do across the industry is enable greater integration, the skills and the capabilities for more collaborative ways of working, the shared processes, shared information through those processes, also these kind of dynamic partnerships, and very much outcomes-focused collaborative delivery models. And so I hope that many people on the webinar just now will be familiar with Project 13, but a really, really good example of something which moves beyond transactions into an enterprise view where we collaborate and work together. So I think that this whole integration and collaboration is a key enabler that is actually essential just now. But then also we have what we can do with digitalization, and I guess that's where we were all coming to. We kind of need to know what that's all about, and I think at its heart, it's really all about people. It is an enabler. We should never think of digital transformation as an end in itself. It really has to be about enabling people. But as it enables people, it enables us to use information better to basically make better decisions, and better decisions drive better outcomes. So we need to see information itself as a value, as something flowing through our processes. So not just see technology. Technology is wonderful, but actually it's like technology is the pipe, but the water flowing through the pipe is the information. We need to see the value of information. And then we need to transform our processes. And yes, we need to apply technology and integrate it wisely. So I think that's really what digitalization is all about. It's about enabling people to manage information effectively, to improve and transform processes, and to apply and integrate technology wisely. And I think where this really matters in our built environment is that if we do see it as this complex, interconnected system of systems, and as we recognize that actually it is becoming a cyber physical system, there is a connection between digital and physical. What that means is that we need to understand that system better and intervene more effectively. And the projects that we get involved in, I've described a few times as interventions. We need to have our projects effective. We need, obviously, to increase the productivity on our projects. That, I think, has to be a given. But more than that, we need to improve the performance of our infrastructure and built environment systems. So it's kind of seeing it as connected. One feeds into the other, and digitalization can help because it helps us to understand the systems and intervene more effectively. And so if we like the vision, I hope we do, it seems to make a lot of sense to me. We can then kind of backcast from that and say, yes, if that's what we want, we do want that. How do we get there? Well, the way we get there is by kind of backcasting, saying what kind of policy do we need to put in place in order to get there? And then following the policy, we can put in place a strategy. And following the strategy, we can put in place the actions to get back to the vision that we agree on. And it's almost like having that shared vision becomes a North Star. It's what we're working towards together, a bigger purpose, seeing that we all have an amazing job in an amazing thing that's going to make a difference. But the starting point after establishing the vision is policy. And I think that it's really, really encouraging to see that is happening. And you may well be aware of a recent publication coming out from the Infrastructure Projects Authority called Transforming Infrastructure Performance, a Roadmap to 2030. And what this does brilliantly is kind of translate the vision that I was just presenting to you into flagship policy. flagship policy of the Infrastructure and Projects Authority. And basically, if you take this diagram and put it on its side, it's the same diagram I was showing you before. Really, it's showing how you have these big outcomes that we're working towards. It's recognizing the systems, the connection between the built and natural environment. It's recognizing the interventions that we can make in those systems, and it's seeing how you can use information better to make those better decisions and intervene more effectively. So I'm absolutely delighted to see this policy coming out and kind of being so well supported. But what that then means is that we're into the next stage. We need to turn this policy into strategy and into action. And then I do believe, working together, we have a chance, we have a hope of achieving this great vision, the vision that sees people and nature flourishing together for generations. And with that, I would like to wrap up.
Thank you, Mark. As always, really fascinating. And I want to crack straight on with the questions, if I could. You talked about long-term investment required for the long term. You noted that roadmap was 2030, which is in the future, but it's not long term, is it? Not like the Romans did or the Victorians did. And how do we balance this sort of long-term investment requirement in a world that's very short-term? We look at the next financial results. We look at the next election cycle. How do you make people invest, not for them, but for the future generations?
It's a real challenge, isn't it? And I think it's very interesting to see how, in some ways, this exact question is being grappled with this week at COP26. And I think you can see a number of nations making serious commitments with a kind of a time horizon of 2050. I guess we've heard over the last few days of other big nations committing themselves to 2070. And I think that there's something encouraging about this, that is much longer term thinking than we're used to. Just one little kind of reflection on it. I don't suppose that when the Romans were doing the wonderful stuff that they did, that they were imagining that some of the assets they were building would still be in operation 2,000 years later. I think that part of what that that says is that it's actually impossible to plan too far ahead. But what we can do, I think, is plan about outcomes. That does mean that we care about it and do things on purpose, rather than just leaving it completely to chance. So I haven't really answered your question, David, but what I hope I have done is say that longer term thinking is really important, and it seems like we might be on the edge of doing longer term thinking a bit better.
Yes, but requiring future governments by and large to deliver. So many of a favourite tactic of all governments, no matter what the colour, is to, if you're not making a target, make it bigger and further away. And it sounds like you've done something, or you've just kicked the can down the road. And we see the short term, don't we? If much of the building is speculative and done by developers who see no benefit from adopting a digital twin program for their building or for the development, what's their incentive to do this?
Yeah, another really good and searching question. I think that making better decisions faster is, in some ways, an incentive of its own. And I very briefly introduced that diagram, which showed the various different processes which are relevant all around the built environment. I try to emphasize the importance of use at the center of it. But then we have the operation and maintenance, the planning, designing, etc. And those are connected processes. And ideally, there should be an information flow through those processes. What so often happens is that we don't even see them as processes, and the information doesn't flow. It just kind of drops in a hole somewhere. So that information flow is important because information carries value. And when we get to a decision point, we release that value, particularly by making better decisions. And better decisions depend on better information. So what I think is that in every single one of those connected processes, there's a benefit of making better decisions faster. And you can make better use decisions, better planning decisions, better operation decisions, and those in some way depend on the process that came before it. So I think that there's a really big incentive, or there should be a big incentive, of making better decisions faster. And if we as an industry recognise the intrinsic value of doing that, then we will drive better management of information. I think that there's some kind of key enablers that would help to unlock that, which we don't yet have in the built environment. And one of those would be to put a genuine value on digital assets, because I think, and I hope to a certain extent, what I've presented has shown that there is value in information, but we don't actually put a value on it. So what that means is that very often, when it comes to hard decisions about money, information and better decisions is kind of secondary because it's not valued. I think that the conversations in boardrooms would be hugely enriched by having a view of information that saw it as genuine value and deserved that kind of board level attention, because then I think we would drive much better information management and much better decisions. So while I am utterly convinced that information has value and needs to flow through these processes, I'm not yet convinced that we have the recognition of that value in our industry. That could definitely move up.
So you're talking to the building engineering services industry in this discussion today. What should a contractor do to engage with this? How should they prepare themselves for this digital revolution?
I think that every organisation across the whole of the built environment has the potential to benefit from their own digital transformation for very selfish purposes, just to make their own business better, to make better decisions in their own context. And then I think also there's the benefit of joining up. And so if we look at the idea of not just smart infrastructure or smart cities, but smart buildings within those, then it has to be that the services that your members provide end up being joined up. And so that means not just having digital transformation for individual organizations, but digital transformation that is shared between them, so that you can have an information flow through projects and through delivery processes. So I think that there's real benefit to your members of individual digital transformation in their own organization for very selfish means, very selfish purposes, just to make the business better. But then also there's this need to have a bit more of a joining up, so that overall, as an industry, we end up being more efficient as well.
So in a world where we're going to have shortages in just about everything, materials and skills and everything, then the more that you have digitized, the better position you're going to be in. Would that be a fair assumption?
I think that's right. Yeah, I think that's right. But as an example, with the kind of shortages you're talking about, I think being able to make better decisions about material choices means that you can manage better when there's shortages. So I guess what I would keep coming back to is this thing that if we manage our information better, then we can make better decisions, whatever those decisions happen to be. Whether it's relating to materials choices or huge, great big things about planning cities. It's basically the same issue, that better management, better information leads to better outcomes, better decisions and better outcomes.
I'm afraid our time is up, Mark. Once again, thank you very much. We wish you all the success with the Digital Built Britain project. And we'll close it off there. But thank you, and see you in the next session.